real. I do it all day, every day, whether I'm looking at new applications and new prospective deals or underwriting our hard money loans. You know, we do everything from, you know, small manufactured home, you know, single family rehab projects to larger subdivisions and developments, multifamily and commercial properties. So I've got quite a bit of experience analyzing real estate investments from a lot of different angles. And so I'm excited to share that in these meetings.
How long have you been doing Seton or real estate?
Yeah, so we started Seton Funds in 2017. Steven, my mentor, who's one of our owners, he's been an investor and private lender since the early 90s.
Wow.
And then my mother, who's ex-banker, she's been also a mentor to me. She's been doing it for over 40 years. So
well, she's not an ex-banker, she's a recovering banker.
Yeah, recovering banker. Exactly. So she has recovered and started her own venture here at Seton. So and yeah, so we bring a lot of, you know, finance, commercial development experience to the table that makes us a little bit different and helps us, I think, in our analysis, looking at potential opportunities. So one of the things we like to do here at the Deal Deep Dive is first just throw it out there to anyone on the meeting to say, hey, you got any deals that you're working on right now that you would like to do a deep dive on? We'll walk through the numbers, you know, go through the specifics of the deal, and then see if we can, you know, come to a conclusion, whether it's you know, judging if the deal is a good one or a bad one, or how do we get it financed, or whatever, what have you there. So
or how to fix a bad one.
Or how to fix a bad one. How would we make it work? So does anybody have a prospective deal that they're looking at that they want to analyze? Joseph, maybe looking at another duplex?
No, I'm not, but I was hoping somebody did so we can analyze one.
Sure. Mike, you got a potential duplex you're looking at?
Not at the moment. I'm at the tail end of a couple of promissory notes, and I got a big balloon January 4th, and I've kind of, as I put it out to the universe, month of January, something's going to come my way, and I'll be flush and do like I like to do, put a lot down so I have good cash flow, and so that's where my focus is.
Mm-hmm. We could talk about that lead that I was going to pass on to you. How would you make that work?
Sure.
So this was a off-market opportunity that was passed to me by another real estate agent that I know. Her friend currently lives in a duplex, great tenant. It's a very well-maintained duplex in North Eugene off of Oakway. I think it's a corner lot. She described it as a beautiful, beautiful piece of property that could easily sell for north of 700,000. Yeah. But the current owner wants to get out of it. He wants to sell quickly, and he's hoping to sell to his one tenant. The other half is vacant right now.
Also, it's non-owner occupied. Tenant
Right.
on one side, empty on the other, and the non-owner occupied owner wants to sell the property to the tenant.
Exactly. He offered to sell it to her for $650. She could not qualify, it sounds like, for the full 650,000, or at least doesn't think she can, because she's self-employed, doesn't have more than 12 months of income statements or tax returns at her current job. There's some financing problems, but supposedly she can qualify for about half of that through non-QM loan product or something of that nature. So she's thinking that she would buy half of the property for 325, and then another investor could potentially pick up the other half of the property. But the question being, how on earth would two people share ownership of a duplex in that type of situation? One thing that this prospective investor could do to work with this woman that we had discussed was maybe forming a special purpose entity, an LLC.
Yep.
And they basically split 50-50 ownership of that LLC and make their individual investments into that entity, which then buys the property outright. It would most likely have to be a cash investor to buy into the other half, because it sounds like that she's going to have financing on her half. And of course, whatever lender is working on that wouldn't want another lender involved. So it would probably have to be a cash investment from this other investor of about 325,000 into the entity. She would bring the other lender to the table. And then that LLC would hold the property. And in general, owning rental real estate in a special purpose vehicle like a LLC is advisable. Talk to any real estate attorney just for liability protection. So it's probably a smart going that way. I've also seen people put together a TIC agreement, tenants in common.
Yeah.
That's another way that you could split ownership 50-50. Me personally, I would much more prefer in this situation dealing with somebody that I am not related to, dealing with potentially another lender involved, is the LLC setup. But a TIC agreement could work, and that's essentially how two, related or non-related people can split ownership on title. It could present some problems with the more conventional lender, and they might not approve of such an arrangement. So those are some details that you probably have to work out with a real estate attorney. Now, if I was an investor on this deal and I wanted to own this full duplex, like maybe Mike does, I would be thinking, why don't I set up a meeting with this woman and, see what her long-term goals are? Maybe if you got talking with her, maybe she just doesn't want to have to move, or she doesn't want to freak out about some other owner. And maybe that's why she's putting forward the offer of buying the property in the first place. And maybe given that she can't qualify right now, it would be a really good setup for an investor to come in and offer a rent to own situation. Say, let me talk to your landlord. I'll buy the property and rent it back to you on a rent to own arrangement. Apparently you want to own this property in the future. Let's get something down in writing. Or maybe she comes back and says, actually, I don't really care to own it. I just don't want to move, or I don't want a new landlord.
Yeah.
You step in and you save the day. And in that case, you probably are dealing with a motivated seller. It sounds like he wants a really easy, simple, smooth transaction. He wants no hassle in terms of financing if possible. And so it could potentially be another setup like we ran into, Mike, on the Harlow property, where you come in and you try and say, I'll take all this worry off of everybody's hands and buy this within 5 to 10 days. And you won't have to move, and it'll be all gravy. And then, we look at maybe a bridge loan situation like that.
Or let's say, what is the difference between rent to own and a seller carry?
Seller carry. So if you were buying it from this landlord and he owned it outright, but you wanted to make a down payment and they would finance it for you, finance the sale.
Oh, no, actually, you brought up another. I was thinking, if I bought the place and the tenant there wants to like eventually own it, I buy it and I do a seller carry. But you introduced a third nuance where if I ask the current owner to do a seller carry, and then I still worked in some manner with the tenant that's there.
Well, I was just saying that a seller carry would be whichever owner, whether it's a current landlord, current owner, or you financing the sale price. Now, for you to be able to finance the sale price to the tenant on a seller carry, so you'd have to own the property outright.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So you could potentially buy it with cash, and then she would be in contract to purchase it and have to put down some sort of down payment, right? And then you would finance a portion back to her. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
I was just, I didn't have a end point. I just, when you talked about seller care, I'm thinking, well, okay, if I buy it, I'm the owner. And then if she wants to buy it and she can't qualify, that's where you do seller carry stuff. And then I work out some kind of deal where I own it, but she's making the payments and everything else and like a regular. And
So-
the security there is like in a seller carry, if somewhere along the line she defaults or something like that, then the property resorts back.
Well, that's an interesting point. So there's a key difference between a rent to own and a seller carry. So a seller carry, the person buying it, this tenant in this situation, would own the property, and you'd be collecting your interest payments back on your note, right? And if they ever default, you would then have to go foreclose, most likely. Not foreclose, but also evict. With a rent to own, you could actually, in that rental agreement, set up a similar structure where you get a down payment. You have their lease terms, you're getting a certain lease, you still own the other half to lease out. You're not, of ownership of that. If they ever default, well, it's no different than a tenant bouncing their rent, and you say, okay, well, you're not going to buy the property anymore, and I'm going to find somebody else. It's a much cleaner, I think, situation, and you still retain ownership of the property you wanted to buy, in the first place. So I think in this particular situation, at least, rent to own makes a little bit more sense.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, I don't even know this woman, so I don't know. You might tell her, and she might say, like, I never cared to buy the property. I just didn't want to move. So like I said, that's a good opportunity to swoop in, try and take it off a motivated seller.
Well, in general, I love talking to people and I'm happy to help people. And at the very least, I would not mind meeting this person just to see if I could brainstorm and just help her with ideas. But if there's a property somewhere in the middle and it works out, then I'm not averse to that either. But yeah, I'll meet anybody and try to help anybody I can.
Yeah. So I'm talking to the realtor that passed it along. She is friends with this woman, is actually contemplating buying it herself, but doesn't know if she wants to do that. And if she doesn't, then I'll definitely pass it along.
Cool. Well, take it a step at a time.
Yeah.
Hey, Zach, what the bedrooms and baths on this each side of the duplex, out of curiosity?
I think they were 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And I believe they're about 1,200 square feet is what she said.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. It's in.
Do you know the address, or can you reveal that, or no?
I don't actually know the address, but it was a corner lot off Oakway. Apparently, like a 2-minute walk to Oakway Mall.
Yeah.
So, pretty good area. Yeah.
Well, it's the right location for me.
It is, right? That's your sweet spot.
The Coburg Road corridor, but I'm right off of Oakway. I'm 7 blocks east of Coburg Road in Harlow. And my duplex is same thing at the end of the block.
Mhm.
I like the neighborhood.
I have some questions for you, Zach, to go over.
Okay,
Okay, so I'm going to go backward in time here instead of from the beginning. Rent to own, we usually call that an option agreement.
yeah, well, an option agreement is a little bit more general, I would say, right? If you have an option contract, I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be to a renter. You could have an option contract with just about anybody. So it's a type of option agreement.
It is,
Sure. Yeah,
but the thing about an option agreement would give the signer, that's the renter, a deadline in which to produce the funds to purchase. And if she or he doesn't make that come true, then they're out of luck and no longer able to purchase the place.
right.
So like, say it's 5 years to get your credit together so that you can own it or buy it, whatever, or 2 years or 1 year or whatever it is. So
Right.
Rent to own as just like a rent to own kind of contract like you have with furniture, let's say. Have you seen that before used in contracts in real estate in Oregon?
I have seen rent to own. There's actually one couple that invests out of Salem. They're pretty prolific investors, and they do it quite often. And they're very successful with it. They charge a premium front. They're super happy with all their tenants because the people they feel like take ownership of the property right from the get-go. So they feel like they get better quality people.
Right.
And very often they close on those options, but if they don't, they're not too worried about it because they'll charge the next rent to own person, you know, a nice premium. So then they're collecting a little bit back to pay down their loan along the way.
So they are using option agreements.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know who their attorney is, or I don't know any of the legal, if you're delving into that, so.
Okay. I just wanted to thicken the conversation a bit.
Yeah, yeah. Have you heard that you can't do that in Oregon from an attorney?
10 years ago, like just a regular rent to own, which implies that you're paying off part of paying off the real estate monthly is what that implies. Not that you're gonna have a final payment or something like that in the end. So rent to own, like, so, you know, that would be like a 30-year mortgage basically, but it'd be a rental to own.
Yeah, their setup was more like a 2-year lease agreement,
Yes.
applying a portion of the rent toward the purchase price and outlining what the purchase price is. And at the 2-year mark, that's when they need to execute their option. If they can't have the financing, then, you know, they're back to a month-to-month renter lease.
Right, and then
Right.
they've lost the deposit. So what you asked for is a big deposit up
Yep.
front, Mike.
They
And
lose
then-
the deposit. Yeah.
Yeah, and then a down payment or such on the option, and then they're paying rent in the meantime, and then not part of the rent going towards the purchase price usually.
Do you keep the rent at the same rental rate, or do you increase it to accommodate some extra payment toward paying down or something?
If you do that, you should do it through an escrow company that will keep the books on all that, because it's going to be really messy in the end if you're accepting payments towards the purchase along the way. Otherwise,
So-
you just keep the rent and get a payment down deposit.
So
Yeah.
regular rent and some kind of down payment. And so I hold the down payment. I'm just charging regular rental price. But are they over time accruing a bigger portion, or no, they just pay regular rent, so they're just paying rent. I got this deposit, and then we say this balloons in 5 years, and then by that time, they have to be ready to buy.
Right.
Okay.
That's the general premise of it.
Yeah.
In other words, they're getting their credit together so that they can qualify for a mortgage payment.
This particular couple, they not only invest in Oregon, but they invest out of state. And I don't know, honestly, legally, you know, if it's different in different
Yeah.
states and what you can and can't do, but they navigate all that with their attorneys. And they have kind of an interesting target market. What they do is they find self-employed contractors to market to for their rent to own. And they get a distressed property and they'll say, okay, you want to own this thing, but you can't qualify now, and I need somebody to fix it up. So let's do this together. And
Yeah, it's slick.
Yeah,
Bunch of
so that's
times.
called an option with, what's it called? When a sweat equity, you'll hear that.
yeah,
Option with sweat equity.
yep. They analyzed one that they did in Mississippi. It was just a slam dunk deal. They bought this house for, it was like $65,000. It's crazy, the prices.
Oh,
And then they had this handyman contractor do a, you know, rent to own. 1 year later, they sold it to him for like 150,000. They didn't spend a dime on any of the rehab. It just was like smooth, clean sailing. They didn't have to do a damn thing.
that's slick.
Yeah, it was good.
Okay, ready for another question?
Yep.
Would you explain tenants in common to our listeners?
Yeah, as much as I can,
Okay,
being a title officer or an attorney.
this is not legal advice, anybody, okay?
Yeah, not legal
Disclaimer.
advice. If you want more advice about tenants in common, you should seek out a well-qualified.
That's right. And Zach is not an attorney. He's too nice.
Yeah, way too nice to be an attorney. Yeah, so my understanding of a tenants in common is it's a great way for whether the folks are related or unrelated to split ownership of a property, and you can create a tenants in common agreement that you both sign. It's a lot like owning a property, like I said, within an LLC. It's just without a separate entity. You each get your share, and then come tax time, you have everything so well documented, you're able to say to the IRS that my, you know, cost basis in this property is, let's say it's like a 50-50 split, is 50% of this, and it's all well documented in a what's called a TIC agreement. You can go to a title company. Typically, they're going to ask, how do you want vesting of the property? Is it tenants by the entirety, or tenants in common, or tenants with right of survivorship? And, you know, two unrelated parties can tell the title company, we're going to do a tenants in common agreement. It's going to be 50-50 or 60-40, whatever people are bringing to the table. And it will spell out exactly how you're splitting that property and that asset. I think that answers.
That's
That
good.
that was good. And you raised another question. I always, on these forums, you see several choices, you know, joint tenancy, tenants in common, tenants in entirety. Without being an attorney, just some basic differences.
Yeah, tenants in the entirety. So that is more typical of like husband and wife.
Yeah.
Right. Tenants in common, more typical for unrelated parties. Joint tenancy, that's a good question, but I think that's the simplest, most likely. It's exactly like it sounds. You both own 100% and you're splitting it, you know, just based on Oregon law. One of you passes away, it automatically shifts to the other party, similar to right of survivorship. So. Typically with the tenants in common, you're gonna wanna go to an attorney and get a tenants in common agreement.
Yep.
Want that definitely in writing. You don't wanna just randomly do a tenants in common and not have something backing it up in writing.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay, my last one is explain why only one lender would want to lend in a partnership deal such as forming an LLC. And if you had, I think you said so, like each, you remember what you said. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, so for the lender, their collateral is gonna be the real estate. And in this case, with a duplex, you've got one piece of collateral. From the lender's perspective, they're not able to divide that 50-50. You can divide ownership of the property 50-50, but that doesn't divide the underlying collateral. So if one party came in with a lender and another party came in with a lender, these two lenders are gonna have to, one of them is gonna have to be willing to subordinate
Yeah.
the lender, which is almost never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Unless one of them was, say, like a small, very small line of credit investment product that they had from like a credit union, they might be willing to do that. But if there are two more conventional mortgages, those lenders, they don't want subordinate debt. It clouds the title, it makes it harder to foreclose, it introduces complications. So most lenders, including us, require a first lien position and no subordinate debt. Occasionally we'll make an exception for a small private note, like gap funding. In the case of like an investment property that somebody's buying, we might be willing to accept subordinate debt behind us of like a very small amount. But that's kind of a rare case when somebody, say, needs assistance with their down payment or something like that. But taking on like a full mortgage behind us would actually be a default in our loan documents and for most lenders.
Thank you. Very good. Anybody else have questions? Because I'm shutting up now.
No, I guess not. So
Is there any difference lending against a property in Eugene versus a property on the coast? The property is a property, or is there different nuances to be aware of, or what?
I think it probably varies slightly county to county. But as far as we're concerned, you know, closing on a property in Florence is not going to be a whole lot different than closing a property in Eugene. If you're looking at an investment property like you, Mike, looking for a duplex, I mean, Linden over on the Oregon coast, you got to think, what is the seasonality of something like that?
Yeah.
If you're running a short-term rental, those are always factors that you have to think into.
Yes.
But as a lender, I guess we would take that into consideration, but the underlying real estate, it's kind of boiling down to numbers at that point.
Yep, appraised value, period.
Yeah, exactly. So Grace, I've been working on a lot of apartment complexes recently. Would you like to delve into multifamily?
Yes, please.
So any property 1 to 4 units in Oregon is a residential property. Those properties are conventionally financeable. Once you get above, or you get to 5 units or more, it becomes commercial. You have to get a commercial loan on a property like that. Commercial properties are valued very differently than residential real estate. I see countless investors, you know, they look at bigger pockets and they have this dream scenario where they start with some wholesaling, then they work their way up to some flips, and then they gather some single family rentals, and then they gather some duplexes, and then they go up to small apartment complexes, and then maybe they're doing 1031 exchanges, moving up. But they build all this experience with residential real estate, and then they jump into multifamily and commercial, and it honestly is so different, and they don't understand the differences.
And it starts with the cap rate.
Yeah, there's cap rates and income capitalization. You have to understand that commercial properties, whether it's multifamily or retail or office, the value of that asset is driven by the income that it can generate for the owner of the property. Sales comparables, they are important for demonstrating, I'm talking in most scenarios, for demonstrating what the market capitalization rate should be. But the valuation on an appraisal is going to be driven largely by the net operating income and cap rate that the appraiser picks. So a cap rate, essentially, if you take an investor buying a piece of property and you basically say, what percent back on your investment are you going to get every single year, right? And so right now on most multifamily, we're doing quite a bit up in Portland. Portland cap rates on multifamily apartment complexes anywhere from the high 3s to 5.5%, depending on the condition and the location of the property. In Eugene and surrounding areas, we're seeing, again, depending on the property, 4.5 to 5.5, maybe 6 for outlying areas in terms of cap rate. So with say like a 5% cap rate, and you're buying a $2 million apartment complex, you can anticipate, if you're buying it, say you bought it with cash, you're going to be getting back 5% of that investment each year. So that's 100,000 in operating income on that investment. So if the income and the cap rate are the drivers of value on a multifamily property, it is super important to understand how to calculate your operating income or your potential operating income. It's not as simple as a single family. It's not as simple as these are my rents and I'm going to say 10% in expenses because it's going to be nice and rehabbed, and I've got this big old fat nugget at the end. No, on an appraisal, you're going to see commercial appraisers, they're putting down, you have to have at least most of the time 5% stripped right off the top for vacancy. Some areas around here are 2 to 3% right now, but still they usually slap on there 5%. Smaller communities, it might be as high as 10% right off the top. So then you have your gross rents chopped down to your effective gross. And then they're going to throw in all types of expenses. With a multifamily property, you're going to have way more management expenses. On a recent transaction we did on a 12 unit, an appraiser estimated nearly 20% going toward management and repairs and maintenance, even for, this was new construction.
Wow.
On that. There was another about 5% off the top for reserves. You have to maintain a capital reserves account for capital expenditures over the life of the property. You're being a landlord of, multifamily property, you have to maintain that asset. So you're just going to have to set aside reserves, and the appraisers know that. They factor that into their valuations, because really from the perspective of the appraiser, they're thinking, what is the market value if, say, some investor from California came up and bought this with their own cash? what is the market value to that person? And what are they gonna have to do to own this asset? They might not be looking at you, let's say Mike, self-managing your 6-unit and your expenses are super, super low. Well, that's great. But if you go to a commercial appraiser, they're gonna be appraising it for what's the average investor gonna be spending on this. So typically right off the top, we're seeing 5% vacancy, nearly 25% in basic maintenance and expenses, and then 5% reserves. So I would say most commercial appraisers on multifamily are factoring in like a 35% right off the top. And then whatever's left at the end of the day is your net operating. For net operating income, you want that to be at least 25 to 30% higher than what your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance are going to be on any permanent financing that you want. When we're looking at our commercial rehabs, it's important that we look at that in scenario. And we say, okay, once this is rehabbed, or even if it's new construction, once it's fully built and they're at 80, 90, 100% occupancy, we're going to calculate their net operating income based on what was in an appraisal or what a commercial appraiser probably would point out. We're going to say, what are the market rents that they're most likely going to be getting at that point in time? Sometimes we'll be able to just point to a number in the appraisal. Other times we'll have to go out and do that due diligence. What are these actually going to lease up for? And then we're going to calculate net operating income, and we're going to figure out, based on how much they're going to need to finance to refinance us out as the short-term lender and go with a more commercial loan, what is going to be their debt service coverage ratio? So most commercial lenders are going to look for a debt coverage ratio of 1.25 to 1.3. And the debt coverage ratio is just another way of expressing, like I said, operating income 25 to 30% higher. So you're taking that operating income and you're getting a ratio of that versus the debt coverage. So if you had, say, 120,000 in operating income, you're going to want that to be at least covering a $90,000 annual debt service for a commercial loan. If you can't hit that ratio, you're going to struggle to get your financing. And it's important to understand there are other products out there that you can go for. They're going to be higher interest, and that nugget that you get at the end of the day after all this work on this big apartment complex is not going to be very big if you're running a 6, 7, 8%, unconventional, even private note on an apartment complex. So understanding that process of valuing the real estate and all that goes into it, and then understanding, some of the basic requirements with multifamily financing is super important. Another aspect that folks don't understand when they're looking at commercial or multifamily is typically those loans are going to be set up with a shorter amortization, and every 7 to 10 years, a commercial loan, you're going to have to go back to the lender and try and get that loan renewed. They're going to do a collateral audit. They're going to make sure that everything is smooth. Most of the time, if all is great, you'll get approved. But if, let's say in the case of like a commercial building, you had a commercial loan that was going great, you had a vacancy, and then you leased it out to a marijuana dispensary. Well, you got to know that at the 7 to 10 year mark, that lender is going to come back and they're going to evaluate that. And they're going to say, do we want to have a piece of collateral with a marijuana shop in it?
Yeah.
Sometimes they say no. So that's something to think about, especially commercial real estate. And then one thing that I did notice during the pandemic that a lot of like multifamily lenders were doing on apartments is they wanted to see that their principals, their guarantors of the loan, the individuals that they were lending to that owned the property, they had a couple of prerequisites. And this is for probably more traditional commercial financing, is they wanted to see, especially during the pandemic, 6 to 12 months of reserves
Reserves, yep.
set aside in their bank account, liquid cash. And they wanted to see that maintained so that they could cover, in case of a massive vacancy, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance for 6 to 12 months. Another aspect, when you get more leveraged and you get bigger and bigger in your portfolios, lenders are going to want to see that you have a tangible net worth sufficient to cover the loan amount. So in certain cases, a lender is going to say, in order for us to have a $1.5 million loan on your apartment complex, one of the requirements is that your net worth, your assets minus your liabilities as a guarantor or combined guarantors is at least 1.5 million. So those two requirements can make it really difficult for a newer investor to go into multifamily, right? You gotta pay to play. You gotta have cash and assets to play. So those are things that people need to think about when delving into that realm. And if they don't have the assets to back up a commercial loan, what other options do they have? So there are some programs out there that I don't broker to myself, but I know some brokers out there that do, that others can, investigate and try and find. But those are some of the prereqs that I know for more conventional, traditional commercial mortgages that people need to think about.
Another nuance in the analysis of commercial properties, because it is so different from regular residential, you can actually analyze the investments against other investments. What if I put my money in this place? What if I put my money in that place? And that's why, from cap rate on through everything else, it's like, okay, what is really my return on this investment? It's over and above just a rental.
Yep. One thing I love about multifamily, though, first of all, obviously, we know we have a deficiency in the housing market. The rental market is crazy right now here in Oregon. So demand is super high, supply is too low. So a lot of investors in the apartment space are basically thinking this thing is bulletproof right now in Oregon. But also, when you're buying a property with a lot of deferred maintenance, the value add potential, just by doing something so simple as going in there, evicting the tenants by if you can, by doing a massive overhaul and rehab of the units, you could find, like I'm looking at one that's actually here in Eugene, they're going to be able to literally double the operating income of the property in less than 6 months. Most of the tenants live in units that haven't been renovated for years. The prior owner hadn't raised the rates in like 10 years.
Oh.
They're going to go in and gut these apartments. They spend, it's minimal stuff. They're mid-level apartments, actually kind of lower level apartments. So they're going to spend maybe $20,000 a unit, like nothing too crazy, just to clean them up. And then they're going to be able to effectively double the operating income, literally double the value of the property. And in our estimate, they're going to spend $300,000 to fix up this piece of real estate, and they're going to generate another $900,000 in equity. I think that's pretty damn good investment, spending $300 to get $900 back in 6 to 12 months. Somebody said something in the chat. Oh, there's Joe. Yeah, another thing that, you know, I love about commercial is the fact that you lose a tenant or two, or, you know, the economy is disrupted or something, and you would have to have a massive problem to lose all of your operating income. You're just gonna have a couple of small dents to it. Whereas with a single family house, you lose a tenant and can't get it rented, you got nothing at the end of the day. Going into commercial and multifamily, you have that layer of protection. People need places to rent. They're always going to need places to rent. So I'm kind of buying more and more into the fact that it might just be bulletproof. We're also looking at, actually as a side thing, our owner and I are looking at an investment in Springfield. And this is kind of an interesting angle that we're taking. We might actually do it in partnership with Homes for Good or
Awesome.
and do some affordable housing. So an interesting setup. I wasn't aware of this until like a year or two ago, but those organizations, you can sign a master lease potentially with them, and they lease some or all of the units of these apartment complexes at market rates. And effectively, they're subsidizing rents for people. And they have such a long waiting list that they will potentially lease up these spaces prior to construction being complete, if you're doing
Wow.
or new construction. Like 3 to 6 months prior to certificate of occupancy, they're willing to pay rents potentially. Now, it's not always a great deal with small properties, but once you get a big enough apartment complex and you have enough units, these organizations, they reach kind of a critical mass, and they're able to put somebody on site throughout the day to help manage the lower income tenants, which just tend to be in more troubled situations, needing more hands-on management. So if you're doing just a few master leases on individual units, they can't provide that. But if you, like I said, they reach that critical mass, I'm not sure the minimum number of units, it kind of depends, but that would just make it a breeze is what we're thinking. And so we're looking at doing one in Springfield like that.
And you're doing some good.
Yeah.
That's real close to my heart.
We need a lot more of those types of developments out there. Get people off the streets, hopefully. Help them.
Hey, Zach, you have a name or a contact at Homes for Good?
I don't, but Stephen does. He knows somebody higher up there. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a speaker from there for my Rotary Club and probably for us too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll check with him and I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Well, it's almost 1:30. That
Yeah.
I kind of just blathered on.
Wow, no, it's
on
great.
apartments.
Hey, I'll show you. I'm going to screen share here and show you what this form I created 10 years ago to decide whether or not I wanted to buy, if the multiplex penciled. And this is before I knew how to use Excel so well. You can see where you get the current information, the current rate, and put in the number of units. Like if 4 of them are 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, whatever, then you put in the current rent, then you figure out what the monthly is. So you would put in, if there's 40 units that are 1 bedroom, 1 bath, what's the current rent and the annual, and they're looking at the monthly income. And so basically you're just getting the gross income, and then you go over here and work on the expenses, everything except for your mortgage. The mortgage, because your income net is based on this income minus the operating expenses.
Yep.
Right. And then at that point, you're able to get your cap rate, which I put down here, by looking at what it's, you know, what you're gonna offer, basically.
Yep.
And then then down here, you figure out your cash on cash return by taking, you know, put in the mortgage information and all that kind of stuff. So that's just without any like figuring out what you're gonna do to fix it up to increase the rents. This is just like as is. I just thought I'd share that. Any questions?
Could either
great.
one of you just do a quick couple sentences, cash on cash return? Is that like everything you put into a property and then what you're getting back? I mean, like, okay, I work
So-
with, go on.
So with putting in your cash, basically at this point, right here, it's because you have to put a down payment in. You know, you're gonna get a loan, but you need 20% down, 25% down,
Okay.
something like that. So that cash is where you're figuring out that. Let's see, do I have that on here?
Down at the bottom, cash on cash return.
Yeah, I have that, but I don't have in there what my 25% down would be that I can see.
No,
No,
well, you have, you know, rate and balance on the mortgage, so you could kind of back to it.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should have that on there, but like I said, it's the old. And then someday I'm gonna redo this and put it on an Excel so it automatically goes ding, because I used to spend a lot of time with the calculator
Yeah.
doing this. All right, I'll stop
Yeah.
sharing.
Awesome.
We have a very similar setup in Excel that we, you know, plug in for our multifamily deals to try and calculate what their as stabilized, as complete value is going to be. We plug it in there and it just spits it out, is what it is.
Yeah, is what it is. I like that. Well, thanks everybody who's here and even one who left for being here. Reach out to me anytime at Grace at orreia.net if you want to, you know, learn more about it, have ideas and what have you.
Because we're better together.
We're better together, and that's our motto. That's right.
That's right.
Stand firm on that. Okay. Thank you very much, Zach.
Thank you, guys.